So hello, everybody. Welcome to our March Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition webinar. I'm Father George Williams with the Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition. Our guest speaker today is Father Daniel Renaud. He is 25 years in the missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate. He works out of San Antonio, Texas, doing preaching and spiritual direction in the US and around the world. And we're lucky to have him with us today to discuss with us the season that we're in, the time of Lent, a time for reflection, and how this time can be a rich time for us as jail and prison chaplains or volunteers to go deeper in our spiritual lives in preparation to continue our ministry. So welcome, Father Daniel.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here from beautiful San Antonio. It's 80 degrees here today. I don't want to make you envious if you were out east, but we are happy that it's warm because we had some very unseasonably cold weather. And we know that we were in your prayers. So the reflection is going to be a little unusual because this is an unusual Lent. I mean, there's no other Lent like this one, I would imagine. So I'm more concerned with some insights, spiritual insights that we might have. And I want to focus on how, as people who are there for others, how do we let ourselves be transformed, both by the ministry, but also, of course, by God and by our relationship with God. And I'll do that through some psychological and spiritual insights. We're going to begin with what I call a Visio Divina. It's not really that. It's kind of like a series of pictures that are there to change the beat and evoke and resonate more from within. So I'd ask you, as you watch and hear, there'll be some music. So I'll put it on twice, once with music in background and then with no music. And I'd just like you to pay attention to what seems to attract your attention, what seems to resonate with you inside. And if you have anything to write on, just to write down which image seemed to have hit you the most or affected you the most. And when you do that, take your time either later today or tomorrow to view that and to see what could God be telling you through this. So we are going to view this slideshow right now. So I'd like you to take a few minutes and write down a couple of words that are evocative of your emotional or spiritual reaction to one of those images. Sometimes images have a more powerful or a more direct way of touching us than words. We are people of the word, but we also are very influenced by images. I need to tell you that when I thought about the experience of your ministry, I touched upon a few of my own. I'm an oblate and a priest, and in my first year of novitiate, which is our training year, we had the opportunity of doing ministry. And the ministry I chose was to do recovery ministry because I am in recovery myself and have been for many years. And something very unusual happened to me. I was visiting, I think it was a minimum security prison. And we went to meetings. And when I went there, they were deciding what their AA meeting was going to be called. And I was very surprised. I went 2 or 3 times, and then they said, you know, we've been talking about it for a while, and we're not sure what we're going to do. So one day they reached a decision, and they communicated to us, the people, the members that came from the outside. And they said, we found the name. They said, we decided we're going to call it the Freedom Group. And I was just like, I just froze. And I just thought, really? That's interesting. And then they explained why. They said, we feel here that we are more free than when we are outside. And of course, we're talking about people who have struggled with substance abuse and who, while they were in a very structured environment, felt safe and were sober, and their life would get better. In fact, one of them confided in me during one of our coffee breaks that he would offend specifically in order to get back in because he had no idea how to live on the outside, and he knew better how to experience life from being inside. And I thought that was very interesting, this idea of freedom. The second piece is, I don't know if you remember this, 3 years ago, Pope Francis had said that, and if you're in this ministry, you probably know this, had said during the year of mercy, that all prisoners, when they would walk through their cell door, should know that they have the indulgence as if they were outside going to one of the Jubilee doors that was set up for picking up an indulgence. And his ministry, as you know, with people who are in prison has always been very close to his pastoral heart as the Bishop of Rome and as the Pope. And I was very stricken by that this experience of mercy that we all need was being made accessible so easily by the Pope. And it touched me very deeply. And it made me reflect on the ministry from a very different place. So those are the 2 things I wanted to share with you regarding my limited experience of prison and jail ministry. So we're going to begin. My presentation today is on it's Lent, but it's also on our ability to enter into a deeper relationship with God and with ourselves through the theme of resilience. And I think that we've heard about it, but I think it's important to revisit it because we're still being tested and challenged in many ways. So I call it psycho-spiritual insights for ministry. I want to begin with the prologue. And this is an intuition that I picked up from Father Ronald Rolheiser. Father Ron says that in the Lazarus story, the early Christians probably were reflecting on the story as a place to understand that Jesus does not usually give special exemptions to his friends. And this is something that, is counterintuitive. Many of us think that because we live a life of faith that we'll be spared. And we know that that's not true. But obviously, that's something that the early Christians grappled with as well. So Jesus treats Lazarus the way he is treated by God. Jesus on the cross is intimately and deeply loved by the Father, yet he's not spared humiliation, pain, and death. Jesus is jeered by the crowd, but he's not rescued. And Ron Rolheiser, in his book, The Passion and the Cross, which is basically his Easter retreat in one tiny little book, says that Jesus never promised us rescue, exemptions, immunity from cancer, or escape from death. He says, the cross and resurrection of Jesus reveal a redeeming and not a rescuing God. And I think that's an important distinction for us to make. So I wanted to talk about the possibility of how you and I are dealing with compassion fatigue. And I've been thinking and praying a lot about how you might be experiencing compassion fatigue, probably to the stretches and to limits and borders that you didn't even know existed. We know that compassion fatigue has to do with living with either vicarious or what they call secondary trauma, which is the residue of being exposed to people who are sharing their difficult stories, where we witness the fear, the pain, and the terror of people. To give you an example of this, I used to do spiritual direction with people who were training as counselors. And I remember one time this person came to me and they sat in front of me and we were having a conversation. And I picked up physically right away that they were in deep trauma. They hadn't done much more than introduce themselves, but my body was saying, because I felt sick to my stomach and I felt this terrible heaviness, that somehow they must be grappling and dealing with and had survived some very severe forms of abuse. And sure enough, that's what it was. So we know that when we are able to care like this, most of us think, gee, I wish I didn't resonate so much. I'm hypersensitive. So I always think that it's somewhat of a limitation, but really most of the time, I think it's a strength. And the data shows that helping professionals who are most deeply affected by their work are the ones that often are the brightest and the best in their field. Basically, because we are caring, chances are we are being very effective. But of course, the cost of that is we need to look after ourselves and to continue to live into a network. And that's what you're doing by meeting regularly. So to be with other caregivers so that we can give care to one another and to live and experience the love of God and the emotional consolation that we need for the very difficult kind of ministry or volunteer work we're doing. And we do this by making self-care a priority. And it's not selfish, because we can only give the best of who we are when we are in a fairly good place. I'm not saying that, we could have a bad day. What I'm saying is we need to continue to foster a way of looking after ourselves so that we can better look after others. So our network of friends are taking time off, our rescheduling, our slowing down is incredibly important. Spiritual director of mine used to say that the busier I got, the more prayer time I was called to put in every day. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So I just want to propose to you some individual practices for resilience. So to either prevent or to act as an antidote or to prepare for whatever compassion fatigue, lockdown, whatever you're experiencing right now in your ministry and in your volunteer work. And these are the following, and I will unpack them a little more. Our ability to self-soothe, our ability for self-compassion, how sleep and dream work can be important to grow spiritually and to find places, oases of consolation and of goodness in our lives, and the practice of contemplative prayer as divine therapy. Now, the focus of this is, for those individual practices, is really like what Teresa of Avila said of mental prayer, or what she calls heartfulness. It's to develop love of neighbor, humility, and detachment. So I want to be very clear here that it's not an egotistical practice. We self-soothe to become soothing. We are self-compassionate to be compassionate, and we rest to be restful, and we do contemplative prayer so that we are a contemplative presence. So the focus is always in tension between the self and others. And I think that the orientation is very important. Self-soothing is the hallmark of emotional resilience. In many people who do work with people who are recovering from different substance abuse and from trauma and from various difficulties, we speak about emotional sobriety, and it is to learn to live in the mid-range. Now, I am someone who has recovered from alcoholism, and I can only illustrate it with my own examples. You see, people like me, and some of you might be like that, we live in the low and the high ranges. We're either depressed or we're really high about the next thing that's happening. And emotional sobriety is the ability to self-soothe and to go to the mid-range place. You see, a lot of people have not had the ability, because of the way they were raised, to move away from the part of the limbic system in our brain that is the flight and fight and freeze response, the survival mode. And of course, we've been there a lot because of COVID and because of isolation and of lockdown. And our prefrontal cortex is where the conscious living is. But it's really interesting that emotional sobriety basically is moving from back here to over here. You know, when they say think about it, well, it really is to move away from that. And I think that there are various things we can do to do this. And we were told that these were important things to do during lockdown. So to make sure that our surroundings are fairly pleasing, that we're not crowded, that we have the experience of sunlight. Supposedly our brain needs 20 to 30 minutes of sunlight, direct sunlight every day. It does something to the chemicals in our brain that soothes us. If you've done hospice ministry, I have this anecdote for you. This woman was in her dying bed, and she was very alone and afraid, and she was talking a lot about her mother, and they asked her what she liked and what she enjoyed about her childhood with her mother. And she said, I used to love when mom baked bread. Well, you know what they did is they baked bread, and she could smell it, and there was a soothing effect that came to her that was unequaled. All of the soothing words and even touch that it could have given her did not have the impact of that pleasant odor. I don't know if you know this, but our first and most developed sense when we are an infant is our sense of smell. And it's also where a lot of our highly negative, but also very positive memories rely, because they have a lot of emotional content. Silent prayer, human connection, positive recall, limiting virus talk or virus information, or information that would create overwhelming feelings in ourselves. So we need to be reasonably well informed, but there is such a thing as being too informed. The other thing that is important for us is to develop the ability for self-compassion. I'm not going to say much about that, but a lot of research has been done, especially by this woman, Kristen Neff, who is in Texas. And it is composed of three interrelated components: self-kindness, humanity, and mindfulness. She happens to be a Buddhist practitioner, but any prayer that will bring us to a place where we can be more focused and where we can let the Holy Spirit and God speak to us certainly will have that effect. And then self-compassion is a way to move from our very self-critical thinking. I should have known better, I should have done this, and to stay away from what we call toxic self-talk. We do it, and the people we minister to do it. And it has to do with the ability to accept ourselves as flawed and imperfect. And self-compassion is linked to emotional resilience. We'll have a greater capacity to interact with others and be intimate if we are capable of being self-compassionate. And it's different than self-esteem. See, self-esteem in a highly individualistic society has a connotation of being better than the other people, of building our own ego. I can do it. It's the rugged individualism of North America. But self-compassion has to do more with accepting our imperfect nature. And we do that by lowering our responses to what could bring depression to us. And there's been some heavy research done on self-compassion, very scientific, very solid. And it really is striking that people who have self-compassion will help to stick to their diets, will be able to quit smoking, will have less of the ability to be in victimization or self-pity. And also, the research indicates that self-compassion is more effective as a motivator than self-punishment. And I think that's key, because motivation is really important in our ministry. How do we develop self-compassion? One practice is to soften the self-critical voice. I should have known better, I'm no good. And I'm sparing you the harder vocabulary that we often use with ourselves. Like if I've made a mistake, I'll say, gee, I'm so stupid. This is not helpful. So how do I correct that? I speak to myself, or I write a letter to myself, or even I imagine Jesus saying to me, what are you doing to yourself, Daniel? You're not stupid. You just made a mistake. The idea is to reframe it in a softer voice. You see, you and I don't realize how often in one day we might have this kind of toxic self-talk. And what it does to us, even spiritually, can be very damaging. So the idea is to use images, to speak to others, to speak about our fears even of being self-compassionate. Well, if I do that, I'll be thinking only about myself, and I'm supposed to be focused on others. You see, what's important is to see the advantages and the disadvantages of what it's like to be self-critical. Some people say self-criticism motivates. It might, but the problem is it does something else as well. So why not reframe it as self-compassion, where only the advantages of self-criticism will show up? None of the disadvantages will be present. Finally, and this is an underrated way of looking after ourselves, is to get enough sleep. Scientists have discovered a revolutionary new treatment that makes you live longer. It enhances your memory, it makes you more attractive, it keeps you slim and lowers your food cravings, it protects you from cancer and dementia. It wards off colds and flu, it lowers your risk of heart attacks and stroke, not to mention diabetes. You'll even feel happier, less depressed, and less anxious. Are you interested? That treatment is called sleep. Most of us are sleep deprived. Most Americans lack about 90 minutes of sleep. And that has an impact on how we live. You know, they say that there's a triad, you know, sleep, diet, exercise are very important. Of course, prayer should be in there, but sleep, diet, and exercise. And they say that all the research is pointing to the fact that now sleep drives our ability to adhere to a good diet and to continue to benefit from the exercise. The sleep is key. It's kind of like the motor that drives the other two. And the other thing sleep does is it fosters neural resilience. Basically, there's a built-in mechanism in our brain, like therapy, that dissolves visceral, painful emotional charges and memories. And you know this because you visit people that are probably sleep deprived and don't sleep well in prison or in jails. And that has an impact on their ability to manage the emotional charges of some definitely strong negative memories they might be having. See, these memories are consolidated and integrated in a positive perspective when we sleep. So I don't know if you knew this, but Pope Francis had a big devotion to Saint Joseph, and sleeping Saint Joseph became, people started giving each other these little statues of sleeping Saint Joseph. The idea is that we trust that God will speak to us in our dreams or just in the rest that we experience, and so that we can act on what we've heard. And this is, biblical characters have done this. There's a Judeo-Christian way of understanding dreams. The prophet Daniel interpreted dreams. Jacob's dream in the ladder was very significant. Joseph in the Old Testament, and in the New, of course, Joseph really experienced dream as a way to experience God's divine guidance. Why don't we do it? Are you listening to your dreams? Are you writing them down once in a while? Do you discuss them with someone? Is there something that might come up there that says something about where God might be wanting to bring you into your ministry? You know, they say that caregivers will have nightmares about traumas that belong to the people they minister to. And that's a sign that you're close to a burnout. And monitoring that is very important to continue to be available for others. You need to know that some dreams possess a revelatory quality. They continue a conversation if we are capable of interacting with certain images. Let me give you an example. I was very sad last week for a relationship that was troubling me and very strongly. So one afternoon, I took the benefit of taking a siesta. And in the dream, my dad is telling me jokes and I am laughing, and I woke up laughing. And I thought, wow, I think God is trying to say to me, Daniel, don't take this relationship too seriously. But I had to pray about it and to insert it into my prayer and say, God, what are you trying to tell me here? Is this just a compensation for the fact that I'm sad? Or is there a deeper meaning here? And of course, the whole thing was that my father's comic histrionic abilities were also something that I possessed. I can have that ability to use humor and not to get so caught up and overwhelmed into the drama of life, whatever that might be. So our dreams will do many things, but they will also be I've had dreams about Jesus speaking to me. Other people say that they have dreams of Mary, where Mary is telling them and guiding them. It's very important to be attentive to those. Now, of course, not all dreams mean stuff. And we do it in a Judeo-Christian way. We're not therapists, and it's not a psychoanalytical way of looking at dreams. Basically, it's more about dream appreciation rather than dream interpretation. To appreciate how dreams can be part of a whole system of looking after ourselves and hearing what God is trying to say. And then finally, I wanted to talk about the 4 movements in the cycle of centering prayer as divine therapy. Some of you might be practicing centering prayer. You know that it's got 4 different kind of steps in the cycle. You begin by prayer with a sacred word, whatever that is. Mine is Heart of Jesus. Yours could be, it's good that it's short. And it's not a mantra. This is not a technique. It's the cloud of unknowing and John of the Cross unpacked so that silent prayer becomes a place where we rest in God. And the resting is about letting whatever comes up to the surface and not letting ourselves be attached to it. There might be all kinds of images or emotions that show up, even physical sensations. And that sometimes are very primitive. You just let them go. You let it evacuate, and then you go back to your sacred word. Now, it's not automatic. You don't do this, and after a week, you'll get the benefit of it. It's something that you have to do every single day. And Keating and other people know, and all people of prayer, mystics and saints, that prayer is something we do every single day and at least twice a day for 20 to 30 minutes. And we're asked to do this as a way of honoring our relationship with God, and it's a more apophatic way. See, dream would be cataphatic, it's about images, whereas the apophatic way is really letting it all go and really resting in God. And the physical stillness is very important as well, because we practice a certain form of physical discipline as we stay put. So I wanted to talk about practices for resilient communities, but I think we'll let that one go. And I wanted to talk about Christian resilience, just a few things. Resilience is a spiritual motivational force that's inherent in all human beings and in non-humans. Nature is resilient. And it's not something you and I create, it's something we participate in. And I always say to people that in the Christian setting, when we speak about the word resilience, we want to have its full meaning in a Christian setting so that we're not caught up in the psychological ideas and the ideologies that are out there. Think about resilience as being a form of prevenient grace. It's a gift of God and it's a sign of God that we are called to receive. It's not something we create. See, the problem is many people see resilience as something that you make out of certain techniques. Everything I've suggested is just a way for us to be open and to receive what God has in store for us. And there's a way to see Christian resilience and to stay away from the medical model, which can be challenging because it's not our tenacious energy that's going to get us wherever. Resilience in the Christian setting really has to do with bearing the cross as a symbol of God's action in the world. And I have a quote for you to finish this, that the Christian act of resilience turns the actor into a symbol of God's action in the world. Whether it's the German sisters on their doomed ship, and this is a quote from a man who wrote about Edith Stein, Stein in her filthy cattle wagon, or any depressed or lonely patient seeking meaning in a meaningless world. These for the Christian must all be ways to know God, especially God at the foot of the cross, which are expressed symbolically in this respect. And I love this, of course, because I'm a former drama teacher, and I really appreciate art, as you know, especially from the slideshow I showed you at the beginning. That in this respect, the artist, the poet, the musician, and the liturgist are the high priests of resilience. For their symbolic language is the outward sign of resilience, and it makes resilience manifest. Basically, when we are resilient, we're speaking God. There's a great example, and there are many mystics and saints, I think, that have been very resilient. If you are in a religious order or you have a favorite saint, just think about, why is this model so important to you? Why is it so strong? Why does it connect with you so much? Chances are that it's because they have gone through some major challenges. I know my religious order, Eugene the Mazenod, he had to go through the French Revolution. He experienced the divorce of his parents. And so his resilience was tested, and his faith became a place where his resilience manifested the action of God. And he created our religious community 200 years ago. Julian of Norwich is a great example, and she's been talked about recently a lot more because she experienced 3 plagues. She lost her husband, probably also a young child. And yet her view and her hope is so striking. She had a beautiful and an amazing mystical experience of the crucified and risen Jesus. And she was on her deathbed, apparently, and she was touched and she was blessed by the crucifix. And then she had this wonderful, deepening experience of God that changed her life. And it really is striking that she didn't, which is unusual for that period of time, she didn't see disease, war, chaos, the loss that she had experienced, the plagues, the political strife. She didn't see it as divine punishment like what a lot of people saw. She saw it really as an invitation to faith and to conversion. And I want to finish with this. She says, but Jesus answered with these words, and he said to me, it's necessary in the sense of useful that there should be sin, but all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. These words were said most tenderly, showing no manner of blame to me, nor to any who shall be saved. What a wonderful, free way of interacting with God. How much spiritual energy and consolation this woman is able to give still to this day. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Daniel. That was a very rich and powerful presentation, and a number of people have asked during your talk if they can get copies of the presentation. So we will put if we could get them from you, we'll put those up on our website.
I'd be more than happy to do that. You might also want to know that I always have a bibliography at the end. And so all the books that I've used for this and the resources, and some of them have links, are in the last slide that I haven't shown you.
Great, thank you. That'd be really helpful. I want to invite our participants today to use the chat feature and the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen if you would like to address any specific comments or questions to Father Daniel. Madeline says, thank you for a very moving presentation. And I second that. I wanted to pick up on a couple of things that you really kind of touched me that I thought were really important. And for those of us who are involved in jail and prison ministry, it's always important to remember that distinction between redeeming and rescuing, that we are there to witness to the redemption of Christ. We're not there to rescue these men and women. It's not our job. That's not. And so I think that's really important, because there's often a temptation for prison volunteers and chaplains to feel like they're going in with a mission, appointed by God to fix or save people from themselves. And, that just leads you to burnout in no time, because again, it's not our job. So that's really
obviously the voice of experience is speaking there, George.
I mean, unfortunately, I know all those things, including burnout.
Might I just say something here, very brief? I also think that, like many codependent people, which there are a lot of in prison, these people will also pull the rescuer out of you, so that there's also a boundary issue where, when you know that you're there not to rescue, and that it's a redeeming activity you're participating in, it also is that you're not being hooked, because some people are extremely good at making you into a savior, even if your agenda is not that. So that we also need to, and I'm not saying they're doing it for the wrong reasons. You know how it is. When someone is sinking, they'll grab whomever's there.
Yeah, that's really helpful and important, and to emphasize that, because often you'll hear people, especially people, administrators, prison, correctional officers, kind of comment about how manipulative the prisoners are, and and how naive we as chaplains or volunteers can be. But it's exactly that dynamic. We go in there with a heart to be people of compassion, and people know how to take advantage of that, because for them, it's not because they're bad, evil, manipulative people, but they're damaged, hurt people who have found over the years that the only way they can get stuff is through those kinds of behaviors. So it's important for us to be conscious of that, because again,
I think every chaplain and every volunteer who goes to prison should have gone to at least 6 Al-Anon meetings.
At least.
Al-Anon meetings are for people who learn how to put their boundaries with love and stay attached, but protect themselves with alcoholics or with drug addicts.
Yes, and then not only that, but people who have those, and then they also have personality disorders on top of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, that's another.
It's a very rich environment for.
It's a very
yeah. And it all feeds into that compassion fatigue that you talked about as well. We do suffer. So we witness so much suffering in the prison that we can't emphasize enough how important it is to practice self-care. And I say that more from the experience of not doing it than doing it, but I recognize how important it is. And if you go back to many of our other webinars, you'll see these themes kind of are going through it. These are critically important things to be aware of as we either enter into prison and jail ministry or find ourselves in it and need to kind of step back, take a breath, and kind of get that second breath that we need at times.
Absolutely. And I think that is a conversion in itself. If we're saviors, and most of us come from families or backgrounds where we were there to help, it's a conversion for us to have people look after us and to look after ourselves, because we've been drilled, some of us from very early age, that we're supposed to be there for others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and and again, you walk in there with sort of a heart toward helping, and you're walking into an environment that is almost the opposite of that. It's designed to be not compassionate. It's designed to be punitive, and so it's sort of a desert. And we bring the kind of the life, the energy, the love, hopefully into that. But we're entering into a desert place, and so it's important to remember that. Bring water along for the journey.
Yes, absolutely. The inner water that the Samaritan woman was offered.
Exactly. I'm still waiting for some comments from our viewers. Again, I think people wanted to probably need some time to absorb some of this as well.
I understand. Yeah.
So, and I think probably, I would invite people to come back and certainly this will be posted online so that people on our website, so people can go back and review it.
Great.
Because again, it's like what you said was so rich. And, the funny thing is most of us, especially those of us in religious life, we hear the stuff, it's there, but it's so important to have it re-articulated regularly so that we can kind of constantly mindfully bring ourselves back to it. Mm-hmm. I also liked what you were saying about sort of the Christian approach to resilience. I had done my doctoral work on staff resilience and spirituality. So I get kind of the distinction between sort of a therapeutic, secular notion of resilience and the deeper kind of call we have as Christians to be bearers of the cross. Another one is the word chaplain comes from the idea of keeping the cloak. It was St. Martin of Tours, his cloak that he gave half of it to a beggar. That became a relic. And those who were tasked with guarding that or protecting that relic were called capellans. And so from that came chaplain. But the idea is that we are guardians of what is sacred. And that means we have to go in there with hearts that are constantly open to God's grace. Sister Misty says, this is what I needed to hear. And she needed to be reminded of self-care. It's Jesus who leads all of it. So that's so true. Thank you, Misty. And others are saying they want to rewatch this too. And how helpful for Lent as well, because we're in this time of kind of like our 18th month, it feels like, of Lent.
Yes, exactly. We've been in Lent for a long time.
At least since a year ago this time. And so I think it's important for us to see this as a time, as you were saying, of a call to conversion and faith, as opposed to any more penitential stuff. The last thing I think jail and prison ministers need is more penitence. And I would say that to the prisoners as well. It's like, for God's sake, you're living, 20 a year long in this penitential system. Why would you need more penance? If anything, you need more self-care and positive.
Yes, exactly. And the self-critical, it all depends, I like, there are people that can do penance and they really do it as a surrender and an offering. But if it's a penance that has an idea of punishment in it, and it's not an ascetical purification, then obviously it can be very damaging, because then what it does is it equates the fact that if I do enough penance, I'll placate the angry God, Yes,
exactly. And I think if it plays into that shame-based thing,
yes,
healthy. But you're right. The discipline is important, and I think for a lot of the men I worked with in prison, they were very good at sort of physical exercise and stuff. But I think no one told them it was okay to also apply that to their spiritual lives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
One of the viewers points out how so many of the incarcerated know the story of the poem about footprints in the sand, and that's so popular there, and they get it. It's like they've lived that, and I think that's the idea that God isn't there, is not going to fix it or rescue us from the situation, but He will give us the grace to get through it. And so it's important, and that's important for us as chaplains to remember too, is that God's not going to prevent us from experiencing vicarious trauma or our own personal losses in our lives, or burnout for that matter. But to remember that it's God who's in control, not us, helps.
Exactly. And the other thing is, I think we need to be open, and I know a lot of you know this, to continue to be, in my religious order, we have this tiny little rule. We have constitutions and rule. And one of our rules, it says, we're sent to the poor to evangelize them. And at times we are evangelized by them.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we need to continually stay open, be very humble, because there are people that will evangelize us that we are called to minister to, and they end up ministering to us. And God loves to surprise us that way.
Exactly. And I think that's so much in line with Pope Francis's approach. And in his most recent book on, he's talking about how going to the peripheries, going to people who are suffering, it's not a form of, it's not charity. It's not doing it. We're going there exactly for that reason, to bring our love and our compassion, but also to receive from them God's presence, God's healing. So it is a two-way street. And you often hear people say, and volunteers or chaplains, that we get a lot more out of the ministry than we bring into it. And that's good. That's what it's supposed to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. You don't do it for that reason, but you have to stay open to receive, I mean, that a lot of them, they have so much to offer.
Yeah. There's Chandra Hansen has on the a reference to a newsletter with an article by you, as a matter of fact, on spiritual direction, and it's Finding Wonders in the Desert, contemplative.outreach.org. So if you want to, well, that again, this will be on the website, but if you want to check out, do you remember that article that you wrote?
I'm not sure if it's Finding Wonders in the Desert. I don't think it's by me.
Okay.
Maybe it is.
That's a different.
No, my article was Finding Pearls. My article was about pearls in spiritual direction. I did write for Contemplative Outreach, Diving for Pearls. That's it.
Pearls.
Thank you, Chandra. I'm glad to hear some people are reading my stuff.
That's always encouraging, isn't it? Okay. Let me see. Are there any last comments from any of our participants that this is your chance to share your own experiences as well? And while you're collecting your thoughts, let me make a couple commercial announcements before we finish up. And one is our next CPMC NACC Town Hall is going to be on re-entry. It's March 18th, and that will be at 1 p.m. Eastern or 10 a.m. California time. And the topic is youth empowerment services from Santa Clara, California, Catholic Charities. And so it's about reentry and working with youth. That's on March 18th. It's a town hall, NACC, National Association of Catholic Chaplains, and the Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition. Our next CPMC webinar, like this one today, is scheduled for April 14th, Wednesday, April 14th at 1 o'clock Eastern time. And that's, again, 10 o'clock California time. And the topic is, what's the difference between prison ministry and jail ministry? And that's an important topic because there are significant differences. And the idea is that while we tend to lump jail and prison ministries together, in reality, we need to be mindful of what the differences are. And they're largely due to the purposes of the facilities. Jails serve one function, prisons serve another. So our speakers that day will be Father Rich Deshays, and he works as a chaplain at the Middlesex County Sheriff's Office in Massachusetts. He's very active in the American Correctional Chaplains Association, the American Catholic Correctional Ministries, and he's also the chaplain of the North American Association of Wardens and Superintendents. So he's going to be speaking more from the jail side. And then our Dale Resinella is going to speak as well. And he comes to this from 20 years of experience as a Catholic lay chaplain in Florida's state prison system, including Florida's death row. And so we get a great, the richness of their experiences, looking at the differences between jail and prison ministries. So again, that's Wednesday, April 14th at 10 a.m. I encourage you also to check out regularly our CPMC website for updates on what we are working on. We are in the process of launching a CPE-like program that would go over the course of about 10 months. It will be online, and the idea is to equip people who are either chaplains or prospective applicants to chaplaincy or volunteers who want to deepen their knowledge base to get the basic material you would get out of a CPE course, but it's more directed specifically to prison ministry. A lot of prisons these days, if they are hiring anybody at all, have CPE units as sort of one of the prerequisites. However, they also usually say or alternative. And we think it's important that people have one or, either the CPE or the alternative. So if you check out our website, and also the National Association of Catholic Chaplains, we're working together with them. They're the main sponsors, I should say, to produce the CPE-like program for jail and prison ministers. So, Jared has put on the chat room a link to the CPMC website and the NACC websites for you. You can always Google it too. Any final comments before we finish up, Father Daniel?
A couple of things. The first one is just thank you for the opportunity to serve. I feel humbled by the great positive comments. It's wonderful. The second thing is I put my Linktree link there. It has a link to all my social media, videos, OST webpage with articles. Also my phone number if people want to get a hold of me for some reason as a resource. And finally, tell you that I gave a class on resilience at OST for the continuing education. And I found this book done by Anglicans in Louisiana. And it's in the last, and it's the book from which I picked up the quote at the end on Christian resilience. So I just want to offer it as a resource for you if you're interested.
Great.
It'll be in the bibliography section there.
Okay. What's the name of the book? Do you remember?
Yes, I think it's called Christian Resilience.
Okay.
Very simply, yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Father Daniel, and thank you all for our participants for being with us today. We'll see you again, God willing, in April 14th or for the town hall on March 18th. And in the meantime, wishing you all a very blessed Lent and as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless.